My name's Angelo, and welcome to We Want Picks. This is the only channel dedicated to UFC picks and DraftKings lineups run by professional fighters and MMA insiders. Every week, I join Nick Newell, professional fighter, professional model, and ESPN Top 10 guest, along with Dan Kramer, UFC fighter, Bellator fighter, Ultimate Fighter alumni, and Jacob Lyons, a skinny kid from Indiana. And we break down every single fight, the betting odds, the DraftKings picks, and we set you up for success. It is Saturday morning. We're a few hours away from UFC 258 Usman versus Burns, and we've had two notable changes to the fight card that have affected our DraftKings lineup. So right now, we're going to walk through our final lineups and talk through the changes that we've made and why. The two notable changes to the fight card are Andre Ewell versus Chris Gutierrez is now available to draft. And we lost the Jim Miller-Bobby Green fight. Jim Miller, as you know, was my underdog pick of the week. So that affected my lineup. So right now, let's get into our final lineups. Dan, I'll start with you. If you want to walk through your lineup, if you've made any changes since the other day and what that looks like now.
I looked at my lineup probably 20 different times since the changes and other guys became available and all that, and I ended up not changing it. So I'll run through my lineup and just talk through a couple things that I was considering, but ultimately why I decided to stay with what I got. So I took Barber for 7,900. She's, I believe, now the betting favorite. A lot of money's come in on her late. I think this is going to be a slugfest of a fight with a lot of points. Grasso's, slightly more technical, but Barber is definitely more physical fighter, more finishing power, I think more aggressive. The one question mark will be in later rounds if she's got the gas. I think she's coming off an injury. So I'm going with her for the value play there. I think she'll score a lot of points. After that, I got Burns and Usman. You can see him at the bottom of the lineup, but I picked both of them in the main event. And I looked at this every which way, trying to figure out if I should go with one guy or another. Was potentially going to take Burns by himself at one point. But the reality of it is both of these guys average between 80 and 125 DraftKings points every time they fight over their career. So I just think it's going to be a competitive fight. Hopefully it goes 5 rounds. They both score a bunch of points. You got to give Usman the edge just with the way he's been winning lately against everybody. But I do think Burns is a live underdog here, and I think he's the one that's more live for a finish. So I've got both in my lineup, hoping for a 5-round back-and-forth battle where a bunch of points are scored. After that, I've got Gabe Green over Rowe. It's another close fight. There are a lot of close fights tonight. So the reason I'm going with Green is I think he's fought the tougher competition. I think he's coming in a little underrated on this one. And Rowe loves to keep his hands down. So he got in trouble against Shabazian. And I just think Gabe Green is a little bit more polished with his defense, and just he may catch Rowe at some point who drops his hands down. So I'm going with Green there, who's also, I think, the cheaper of the two fighters and now the betting favorite. After that, I got Marquez over Pitolo. So this was probably my riskiest play of the night because he's $8,700, so he's more expensive. I do think Maki Pitolo is a live value play, but I ultimately went with Marquez compared to all the other expensive fighters just because I think he's got the most finishing power. So he's coming off a big layoff, which is a question mark. But when I read up on him, he's been in 3 training camps over the last year getting ready for fights. So it's not like he's coming fresh off the injury. I think he's probably fully prepared for this. He's going to be focused. And out of the two, I think he's got the more finishing, the more power to finish. So going with Marquez over Pitolo. And then last, I got Muhammad over Lima. This is another one where I think the odds are a little off. I don't think Lima should be that big of an underdog. But he hasn't fought since 2019. And Muhammad's been very busy lately, beating a lot of tough guys. He just recently beat Lyman Good in a very tough fight. So I think it's going to be a close fight in jiu-jitsu wise, striking wise, but I think the X factor here is wrestling with Bilal. So I'm taking him for the $9,200, and he's been known to score a lot of points, even in a bunch of decision wins. So that's my final lineup. Let's see how it goes, and enjoy the fights tonight.
Yeah, that's a solid lineup. I always like your lineups. I beat you more than you beat me, which is interesting, but I always like your lineup.
I don't think that's true at all, actually. There's a record of Venmo transactions that can prove otherwise.
So I do like your lineups. The Muhammad one, I didn't touch that. I think Muhammad wins. I think he dominates, if you will. I just don't know how many points he's going to score. I imagine it's takedown, a bunch of control, and now there are control points with DraftKings and some strikes, but I don't think there's a finish in there, and I just don't know how busy he'll be after the takedowns. But he's a lock to win, and he's not going to score no points. So
it's a good point. And I looked at that too when I picked him, because I was like, man, he's got a lot of decisions on here. And I went through his history of decision wins, and he always put up a good amount of points. I think it was 70 plus on the majority of all his decisions. So obviously 70 for $9,200, not so great. But if he gets up there with 90, or if he does get a finish and wears Lima down with the wrestling, that would be obviously more points. So I liked him better than the other more expensive guys on the card.
Yeah. Well, and anytime you have basically a lock for a win, it's hard to ignore that. So let me walk.
No such thing as a lock these days after the last couple of weeks, but
yeah,
I think he's got the edge just for being more busy lately.
Yeah, and let's put it this way: I have Ricky Simon in my lineup, and I'll go through that in a second. I think Muhammad is. I'd bet a lot.
I love how you always call him Ricky Simon, no matter how many times. I know,
it's Simone. I just
acknowledge his last name is Simone.
There's no tilde and there's no E. So I'm saying Simon every time. Like Ricky should win. I think he will win. We've picked him to win. But if he loses, nobody's going to be surprised. If Muhammad loses, everybody will be surprised. So this is an interesting one, because I think Ricky gets a stoppage. I think Ricky scores more points. But he could lose, where I just don't see a world where Muhammad loses. So let me walk through my lineup. And those are the small decisions that are the difference between, Dan Venmoing me or me Venmoing Dan. So I also doubled up the main event. I just saw in one of the Facebook DraftKings groups, people asking, should we double up the main? I don't always double up the main, and we don't always advocate doubling up the main. And if you look at the Overeem Volkov fight last week, nobody did. We almost didn't even touch the main for the most part. In this case, Gilbert Burns is so inexpensive. He's $7,200, and he's very good. I think he loses this fight, but he's good enough to score some points. He's good enough to get stuff done, and he has 5 rounds to get work in, where if you look at anybody else in that price range, they're very outclassed. They should not win. They probably won't win. And they only have 3 rounds to be a big underdog in, where Gilbert Burns has 5. So you always want, a lineup is made up of 6 fighters. If possible, you want 6 wins with 6 knockouts, right? But that's not always possible. And in this case, there's a lot of mismatches. And I just think Gilbert Burns at that price point with 5 rounds to put work in, it makes sense to double up the main. It just does. So I've doubled up the main. I think Usman wins, but Burns has plenty of time to put in some work and score some points. And again, 5 rounds to do it. I've also gone with Gabe Green over Rowe. All of our individual fight breakdown videos are uploaded, so you can check those out for more detail. But I think Gabe is more well-rounded, and I think he just gets it done. He was the less expensive fighter, but I think, I think he wins. Genuinely, I think he wins. It is a close fight, but at the price, and he has never won without a finish, I think he gets that done. This next pick, the Heinich over Gastelum, this is what I switched Jim Miller for. Jim Miller dropped. That Bobby Green fight is off the card entirely. I had Jim Miller, so I needed somebody else at an affordable price. I needed another underdog, and I'm going with Heinich over Gastelum. It's less about Heinich and more about Gastelum. I just don't think he's going to show up. He's on a 3-fight skid. Yes, it's against great competition, but he's losing not because of his technical abilities or his talent. He's losing because he's not putting the work in the gym. He's showing up out of shape. He's not putting in the effort. He's one of these guys, in my opinion, that's just so talented. He's never had to really, grind for it. Where Nick Newell, who's on this podcast, is very gifted naturally, but he works really, really, really hard. And he's been open about how hard he has to work to be as good as others. And I think Gastelum's the exact opposite there. And I don't think he shows up. And I think Heinisch wins. I think he's a great underdog pick. And again, I swapped Jim Miller for him once that Jim Miller fight dropped. Next, we just mentioned I'm going with Ricky Simone. I think he wins. He is like a bolt of lightning in these fights. He comes out, he's aggressive, he's busy, he strikes, he grapples. The only way I see him losing this fight is if Kelleher, who's a tried and true vet, has that, one trick pony type guillotine and catches him. It's very possible. But don't forget, Ricky Simon out grappled Yanni. So he out grappled very good high level BJJ black belts. And I think
Kelleher throws some heat too. Don't forget that.
Anything's possible. It is a fist fight. This is of all of my favorites, he's the one I'm the most worried about. And it's really because Kelleher is one of those vets that can squeak something out. But I think Simone wins, and I think he gets a good amount of points. We already talked about Usman Burns, and the last one is Vieira. So he is one of the best jiu-jitsu guys on planet Earth, and he's fighting another jiu-jitsu black belt who's not even in the same stratosphere. So I think that ends. I think it ends early. And again, there's just no way Vieira gets submitted. There's no way he's going to lose a decision. He could get knocked out because anybody can, but this is black belt versus black belt. But one of them is one of the best in the world. So let's take a look. Nick and Jacob couldn't join us today. Nick runs a gym. He's got 2 kids. He's very busy. Jacob is literally sleeping and watching Twitch. So let's not worry about him. Let's walk through their lineups very quickly. I'll tell you right now, I'll start with Jacob if you want to go ahead and touch Nick's. Jacob did not make any changes to his lineup. He left it the same. He was waiting for Andre Ewell to become available because he likes that underdog pick, but he didn't touch it. Ultimately, similar to Dan, he thinks Barber gets it done. She's now the favorite, even though she was priced as an underdog and open as an underdog. I'll touch on Lima last. He also went with Ricky Simon. He's a giant fan, or Simone. He's a giant fan. Ricky puts up good points. I just talked about it. Jacob has the same logic. He did not double up the main. He went just straight up Usman. And the reason he did that is because Diego Lima was so cheap that he can then also afford Simone, Vieira, and have 3 big, heavy favorites. So to the Diego Lima pick, we don't think he wins. Jacob doesn't even think he wins. Jacob thinks he can win, which he can. But the reason he drafted him is he was $7,000. That is very inexpensive. I don't think Diego gets finished, and Jacob doesn't think he gets finished either. So he has 3 rounds to win, potentially, and he'll survive, and he may score some actual points there. And freeing up that extra money, he could afford Vieira, who we just talked about, which is a guaranteed lock, essentially. I disagree with this pick. We'll see how it works out, but I disagree. For $200 more, you get Gilbert Burns, who has 5 rounds to score points and has more potential to win. So we'll see how this lineup works for Jacob. He's running around the streets, shirtless, swinging around, talking about how he got 6-0 last week. That's not happening this week, but we'll see. It's a decent lineup, but we'll see what happens. Essentially, he swapped Gilbert Burns for Diego so that he could afford some of these heavier favorites, and we'll see how that works out.
All right, and I'll run through Newell's real quick. We touched on some of them. He's got Usman and Burns in the main event. We talked about that a bunch already, why that makes sense to do, why we think that is going to be a lot of points. He's got head-to-head against me, actually, Patola, which honestly I think is a solid value pick. Patola is a good striker, and Marquez is coming off a layoff. So I think at $7,500, there is a good chance this goes 3 rounds in a war, in a slugfest, and he could get a bunch of points in a decision loss or eke out a decision win in a slugfest. So I think there is good value on Pitolo at $7,500. He picked Vieira, $9,300. I think most people feel that Vieira is going to get the takedown early and sub Hernandez pretty quickly. I think that's probably most likely. I didn't touch it just because I'm concerned about Vieira's conditioning if he doesn't get his way early. And I think Hernandez is slightly underrated. So I do think Vieira will win. He'll get the sub. But I just think if that doesn't happen, it could turn into an ugly fight, and Vieira could start looking pretty tired in midway through the second, third round. Next up, he's got Muhammad. We talked about busy, active fighter, scores a bunch of points, even in decisions. So he's got him over Lima, and then the last minute add-on was Ewell at $7,800, which is another pick that I think is good. I didn't touch it. Just because I think it's a very close fight. And I think depending how Gutierrez shows up, it could go one way or the other. But Ewell looked to be very athletic, powerful striker in the early rounds, fades a little bit in the second and third, but each fight he looks to be getting better with his conditioning. So I could see him winning this fight. I could see him in a 3-round slugfest. And honestly, Gutierrez's biggest problem that I saw in recent fights was he didn't stay aggressive. He likes to fight on the outside, where Ewell, being a really long, rangy fighter, that may not work in Gutierrez's favor if he chooses to implement that game plan. So all in all, I like both his value picks. I like his lineup. I think we all got pretty solid lineups. And we'll see how it goes.
So there's our walkthrough, our final DraftKings lineups for tonight's UFC 258. If something changes again, if there's a last minute drop, there's not going to be any ads at this point, but if there's a last minute drop, check back here, check the Twitter, check the Instagram. If you come to the YouTube channel, there's a tab called Community. That's where we can post images and things like that. If there's a last minute drop or something changes, I will post images of our lineups there. So just be sure to check us out if there's a drop right before the fights. Let us know down below what picks you like, what picks you don't like, and what your lineups look like. We respond to everything. Good luck tonight, and we'll see you tomorrow for our recap show. My name's Angelo, and welcome to We Want Picks. This is the only channel dedicated to UFC picks and DraftKings lineups, run by professional fighters and MMA insiders. Every week, I join Nick Newell, professional fighter, professional model, and ESPN Top 10 guest, along with Dan Kramer, UFC fighter, Bellator fighter, Ultimate Fighter alumni, and Jacob Lyons, a skinny kid from Indiana. And we break down every single fight, the betting odds, the DraftKings picks, and we set you up for success.